Your soulmate saying, "I need to tell you the truth right now. Before this gets out of control, something happened last night that changed the energy around this connection. You may not know exactly what happened. You may not have seen the conversation, heard the words, or witnessed the moment that caused everything to shift. But somewhere behind the scenes, something was finally brought into the light, and now a truth that has been held back for far too long is demanding to be acknowledged. That is why this message found you at this moment. There are times when life becomes strangely quiet just before something important is revealed. You can feel it without understanding it. You wake up with a thought you cannot explain. You remember someone unexpectedly. You notice an old feeling returning. A name crosses your mind. A memory suddenly feels more intense than it did before. You may even wonder why your heart seems to be waiting for an answer that nobody has spoken yet. Sometimes the answer begins before the words arrive, and last night, something happened that may have made someone realize they cannot keep pretending everything is fine. They have been carrying something inside, a truth, a realization, a question, a feeling they did not know how to explain. And according to the story this message is inviting you to imagine, they reached a point where keeping everything hidden became harder than admitting what was really happening inside them. This does not mean you should assume exactly what another person is thinking or doing. You deserve honesty that comes directly from people, not guesses, signs, or assumptions. But as a reflective message, this moment can represent something powerful. The truth eventually asks to be faced, and perhaps that is the real reason you are reading this now, because before anything changes outside you, something often changes inside you first. You have spent enough time wondering. You have spent enough time replaying conversations. You have spent enough time asking yourself whether something was real, whether someone cared, whether a silence meant something, whether distance was temporary, whether a connection had a future, or whether you were simply holding on to something that had already disappeared. But what if this chapter is not asking you to chase an answer? What if it is asking you to become strong enough to receive the truth, whatever that truth turns out to be? That is where everything begins. Last night, imagine that your soulmate was surrounded by people, conversations, distractions, and noise. Maybe they were laughing. Maybe they were trying to appear relaxed. Maybe they were acting like nothing was bothering them, but underneath the surface, something felt different. There was a thought they could not escape, you, not necessarily because they were destined to be with you forever. Not because some invisible force controls their choices, but because you represent something unfinished in their emotional world, a conversation that never happened, an apology that was never given, a question that was never answered, a feeling that was never properly named. And sometimes the hardest thing about an unresolved connection is not losing the person, it is losing the version of yourself you became around them, that version of you that hoped, that version of you that waited. That version of you that believed there was still something worth understanding. Last night may have brought one of those memories back to them. Maybe someone mentioned your name. Maybe they saw something that reminded them of you. Maybe a song, A place, a photograph, or an ordinary conversation unexpectedly opened a door inside their mind, and suddenly, something they had pushed away came rushing back. They may have tried to ignore it, they may have changed the subject, they may have smiled and acted unaffected, but deep down, the question remained, why am I still thinking about this? That question can become powerful, because when someone realizes they have not truly moved past something, they have two choices: they can run from the truth again, or they can finally face it. This message is about the second possibility, not because anyone can guarantee what another person will do, but because truth has a strange way of becoming louder when you stop trying to silence it. And perhaps your soulmate, in this story, has reached that moment, the moment when pretending becomes exhausting, the moment when silence stops feeling safe, the moment when they realize that avoiding a conversation does not erase what needs to be said. Something happened last night, and maybe the most important part was not what someone said. Maybe it was what your soulmate finally admitted to themselves. They are not as unaffected as they wanted to appear, they are not as certain as they pretended to be, they do not have every answer, and perhaps they finally realize that the distance between two people cannot always be explained by a lack of feeling. Sometimes it is fear. Sometimes it is pride, sometimes it is confusion, sometimes it is timing, sometimes it is the inability to communicate honestly, and sometimes two people simply want different things. That is why this message does not ask you to assume, it asks you to listen. Listen to your own heart, listen to reality, listen to actions. Because words can be beautiful, but consistent actions reveal whether words have meaning. If someone truly wants to repair something, they eventually have to communicate. If someone truly values your presence, they have to show respect. If someone has something important to say, they have to find the courage to say it directly. You do not have to decode every silence. You do not have to investigate every coincidence. You do not have to spend your days wondering what somebody might secretly feel. You deserve clarity, and perhaps that is the deeper message hidden inside the dramatic title. I need to tell you the truth right now. Truth is not supposed to make you smaller. Truth is not supposed to keep you trapped. Truth is not supposed to make you afraid. The right truth, even when difficult, gives you freedom. Maybe the truth is that someone misses the connection. Maybe the truth is that someone regrets how they handled the past. Maybe the truth is that someone has been afraid to speak. Maybe the truth is that they are confused. Maybe the truth is that they need to move forward separately. Whatever the truth is, you are strong enough to hear it. That is what has changed. You are not the same person who once needed another person's answer in order to feel whole. You have grown. You have learned. You have survived moments you thought would break you. You have discovered that waiting does not create certainty. You have discovered that love without respect becomes painful. You have discovered that hope can be beautiful. But hope should never require you to abandon yourself. And perhaps your soulmate is beginning to recognize something similar. They may be realizing that people cannot endlessly run from conversations that matter. Every avoided conversation becomes emotional weight. Every hidden thought becomes another layer of distance. Every maybe later eventually becomes a question: how long can I keep doing this? Last night, maybe that question finally became impossible to ignore. Imagine the scene. The night is moving forward, everyone around them is talking, the world appears normal, but suddenly their attention drifts, their mind returns to something unresolved. They remember something you once said. They remember a moment when everything felt simple. They remember a conversation that ended too soon. They remember how differently they felt before fear entered the picture, and for a moment, all the distractions disappear. They are left alone with their own thoughts. That can be an uncomfortable place, because there is nowhere to hide from yourself. You can distract yourself from another person, you can avoid their messages, you can change your routine, you can stay busy, you can convince other people that you are fine, but you cannot permanently escape your own conscience. Eventually, the quiet arrives, and when the quiet arrives, the truth gets louder. Perhaps your soulmate finally asked themselves, "What am I actually afraid of?" That question can change everything. Maybe they were afraid of rejection. Maybe they were afraid of being vulnerable. Maybe they were afraid that admitting their feelings would make them lose control. Maybe they were afraid that too much time had passed. Maybe they were afraid you had already moved forward. Maybe they were afraid they would have to apologize. Maybe they were afraid that the truth would force them to make a decision. And sometimes people delay honesty because honesty creates responsibility. If you admit that you care, you have to decide what you are going to do with that feeling. If you admit that you made a mistake, you have to decide whether you are willing to repair it. If you admit that you are confused, you have to stop pretending to have all the answers. If you admit that you miss someone, you have to confront the reasons you walked away. That is why truth can feel frightening. Truth removes excuses, but it also removes unnecessary confusion, and you may be entering a period of your life where confusion is no longer acceptable. You are learning to recognize the difference between intuition and anxiety, between hope and obsession, between patience and waiting indefinitely, between love and attachment, between a meaningful connection and a fantasy built from unanswered questions. This distinction matters, because you deserve relationships that exist in reality, not relationships that require you to interpret every small event, not relationships that make you constantly wonder where you stand, not relationships that make you feel like you must earn basic communication. If someone wants to be part of your life, they must eventually meet you with honesty, and perhaps that is the lesson your soulmate is beginning to learn too. Maybe last night was not about some dramatic secret. Maybe it was simply the moment they realized that avoiding the truth was creating more chaos than facing it, before this gets out of control. Those words carry a powerful meaning, because emotions can become complicated when they remain unspoken for too long. A small misunderstanding becomes a major assumption, a missed conversation becomes emotional distance, a fear becomes resentment, a memory becomes a story becomes a belief, and eventually two people may be living inside completely different versions of the same situation. One person thinks they do not care. The other thinks they do not want me to reach out. One thinks they moved on. The other thinks they probably forgot about me. And neither person knows what the other is actually thinking. That is how emotional distance grows. Not always because love disappeared, sometimes because communication disappeared. So imagine your soulmate finally recognizing that. Imagine them thinking, I cannot keep assuming. I need to know the truth. That realization could be more important than any dramatic confession, because maturity is not simply having strong feelings. Maturity is learning how to handle those feelings responsibly. It is knowing when to speak, knowing when to listen, knowing when to apologize, knowing when to give space, knowing when to move forward, and knowing when something is no longer healthy to hold on to. Perhaps that is what the night revealed, not necessarily the future of your relationship, but the truth about what has been happening inside. And that truth matters. You may have been wondering why certain memories keep returning. Maybe you have felt emotionally unsettled without understanding why. Maybe you have experienced moments when you suddenly wanted to check your phone. Maybe you remembered an old conversation. Maybe you felt a strange urge to revisit something from the past. Instead of treating those feelings as proof that another person is secretly communicating with you, use them as an invitation to understand yourself. What are you still hoping for? What are you still afraid of? What do you wish you had heard? What do you wish you had said? What would closure look like? What would healthy reconciliation look like? And what would peace look like if the story went in a different direction? Those questions are more powerful than trying to predict another person's thoughts, because your life belongs to you. Your future belongs to you. Your choices belong to you, and no soulmate message should ever convince you to surrender your judgment. If someone returns, let their actions speak. If they apologize, listen carefully. If they make promises, watch whether those promises become consistent behavior. If they say they have changed, give change time to prove itself. You do not need to rush. You do not need to make a decision simply because emotions become intense. You are allowed to pause. You are allowed to think. You are allowed to protect your peace. And perhaps this is exactly what makes the message so powerful. You are not being asked to chase someone. You are being reminded to remain grounded while the truth reveals itself naturally. Because what is real does not need to be forced. What is healthy does not require manipulation. What is genuine can survive an honest conversation. Last night may have created the beginning of that conversation. Maybe someone finally told a friend what they have been feeling. Maybe they admitted that they are confused. Maybe they confessed that they still think about the past. Maybe they finally acknowledged that they hurt someone. Maybe they said, I do not know what to do. And perhaps the friend responded with something simple, then stop running from it. Those words can be life-changing, because sometimes the person standing between you and clarity is not another person. It is fear, fear of being rejected, fear of being wrong, fear of vulnerability, fear of consequences, fear of discovering that the answer is not what you wanted. But there comes a point when uncertainty becomes heavier than truth. And perhaps that point arrived last night. Your soulmate may have realized that they cannot control how you respond. They cannot control whether you forgive. They cannot control whether you still care. They cannot control whether you have moved forward. They cannot control the past. The only thing they can control is whether they are honest now. That is a powerful realization, because honesty does not guarantee the outcome you want. It guarantees only that you stop living behind a false version of yourself, and maybe that is what this person needs, not another escape, not another distraction, not another excuse. Truth, simple, uncomfortable, honest truth, and maybe you need that too. You may have spent too much time trying to understand somebody else's behavior. Now it is time to understand your own heart. Ask yourself, if they came back, what would you actually need? Would an apology be enough? Would you need changed behavior? Would you need time? Would you need boundaries? Would you need answers? Would you even want the same relationship anymore? These questions matter because sometimes we spend so much time waiting for someone to return that we forget to ask whether the person returning would actually fit the life we have built. You have changed, your standards may have changed, your dreams may have changed, your understanding of love may have changed. And that means even if someone from your past returns, the relationship cannot simply resume where it stopped. It would have to be rebuilt, slowly, honestly, respectfully. That is the only kind of reunion worth celebrating, not a dramatic return followed by the same old problems, not intense words followed by silence, not promises followed by confusion. A healthy connection is not measured by how dramatic the beginning is. It is measured by what happens after the emotion settles. That is where character appears. That is where consistency matters. That is where truth becomes visible. So if someone tells you they have been thinking about you, do not immediately assume what it means. Ask what they want. If they say they miss you, listen, but also ask whether they understand why the distance happened. If they apologize, hear them, but notice whether their behavior changes. If they want another chance, ask what will be different this time. These questions are not cold, they are wise. You can have a soft heart and strong boundaries at the same time. You can care about someone and still protect yourself. You can forgive someone without giving them unlimited access to your life. You can wish someone well without returning to a situation that hurt you, and you can love the memory of a connection without needing to recreate it. That is real emotional strength. Maybe your soulmate is learning this too. Maybe last night forced them to see that feelings alone cannot repair what communication damaged. Maybe they realized that wanting someone is not the same as being ready for them. Maybe they realized that timing matters. Maybe they realized that they need to become more honest with themselves before asking anything from you. And maybe that is why everything feels different now. Not because the universe has guaranteed a particular outcome, but because awareness has entered the situation. Once you see something clearly, you cannot completely unsee it. Once you recognize a pattern, you cannot comfortably pretend it is not there. Once you admit the truth, every future choice is made with greater awareness. That is the transformation. You may be entering a season where you stop accepting emotional confusion as evidence of deep connection. You stop believing that uncertainty automatically means destiny. You stop thinking that silence always hides secret feelings. You stop interpreting pain as proof that something must be meant to be. Instead, you begin asking a better question. Does this connection bring honesty, respect, peace, and growth? into my life? That question changes everything, because real love should not require you to abandon yourself. Real care should not make you constantly question your worth. Real connection should leave room for communication. And real growth requires two people to take responsibility for their own choices. Perhaps last night was the beginning of that realization for someone. Maybe they finally looked at the situation without excuses. They may have remembered moments where they could have communicated better. They may have recognized that their silence hurt you. They may have understood that distance did not erase the consequences of their actions. And maybe they felt regret. Regret can be painful, but regret can also be useful when it becomes responsibility. There is a difference between saying, "I feel bad about what happened," and saying, "I understand what I did, and I am willing to make different choices." The second one represents growth. If this person ever speaks to you again, look for that difference. Listen beyond the beautiful words. Listen for accountability. Listen for clarity. Listen for respect. And most importantly, listen to yourself. Your body, mind, and emotions deserve consideration too. If a conversation makes you uncomfortable, you can pause. If someone pressures you, you can step back. If someone refuses to respect your boundaries, you do not owe them access to you. If someone genuinely cares, they will understand that trust takes time. That is another truth this message carries. You do not have to rush the future. You do not have to force a reunion. You do not have to create a dramatic moment. Let reality unfold. Let people show you who they are. Let consistency become evidence. Let time separate genuine